My name is Michael Bartanen. I'm the historian and archivist for Pi Kappa Delta. Well, the historian's job is to keep kind of the records, connect to the present with the past. And the archivist keeps all of the, organizes all the records that the organization has, that it's collected over the last 100 years. The archiving part is it's a challenge because we really have never had the records archived. So I'm trying to put them into order and digitalize some of the older, more fragile ones. And so that's a challenge since I'm not trained as an archivist. Basically, academic debate as an activity really probably started sometime in the 1880s or 1890s. It's really not clear when the first competitive debate began, but it probably began right about 1881. But it didn't really get much notoriety until Harvard and Yale debated in 1893. And this was a big deal, and it was covered by the New York Times. And so generally we kind of trace the beginning of debate as an activity to the Harvard-Yale debates in 1893. Well, right after the turn of the century, one thing that was happening in the United States was a great deal of interest at the college level in having fraternities. Because the residential college idea itself was only about 50 years old, and that is until prior to 1869, students didn't live on campus. They just they came and went. And so the idea of the residential colleges inspired colleges and college students to be interested in fraternities. And so there were the social fraternities that we think of today, but there were also fraternities organized around activities, theater, athletics. There were some journalism fraternities even, and so in 1906, a group got together and founded a debate fraternity, and that was called Delta Sigma Rho. And it was organized in Michigan and Illinois, and the idea was to make a fraternity about debate that was parallel to Pi Beta Kappa. Which was and has been the most prestigious fraternity and honorary society in the United States. And so Delta Sigma Rho the model was to have it in very large universities and kind of the flagship universities in each state. Okay. Well, that inspired a lot of other people to think, well, gee, if we have Delta Sigma Rho, perhaps we should have fraternities about competitive debate that were organized for different kinds of colleges. And so a whole bunch of them sprung up, most of which didn't survive very long, but Pi Kappa Delta was established in 1913 by, its home was in Ottawa College in Kansas, and its goal was to have a fraternity for debate that was for smaller colleges. Because basically they were jealous they couldn't get into Delta Sigma Rho and couldn't play with the high rollers, and so they organized their own fraternity. The founder of the fraternity, there was 6 of them who were originally the founders, but the most prominent of these founders was Egbert Ray Nichols. E.R. Nichols was probably one of the most fascinating characters in communication education in the 20th century. He was I think he was born about 1893, so he was still a relatively young man when he went into debate education. And his first teaching spot was at Ripon College in Wisconsin. Ripon was also one of the founding members of Pi Kappa Delta. And so Nichols, whose whole life, and he was a debate educator for more than 60 years, and in a very prominent one at that, his idea, and he did this through correspondence with other like-minded individuals, because really, there weren't telephone communications at that time. So basically, when you got things accomplished, you wrote letters to each other. So it took them a long time to kind of get organized, but they founded this fraternity in 1913. The first chapter was at Ottawa College, and Nichols and his colleagues they based their fraternity based on the Masonic model of the Masons. Kind of Dan Brown has kind of brought that back into prominence, but it was a very important organizational tool, particularly in the earliest or late 19th and earliest 20th centuries. And so they used the Masonic principles as their basis, including the Greek lettering PKD, and adopted a motto, and they created a key, a lapel key that you could put on your lapel to demonstrate that you were a member of Pi Kappa Delta. And their motto was the art of persuasion, beautiful and just. And so the whole idea of this fraternity movement was not so much to inspire competition, but to promote what I would call kind of progressivism, which was very big at the beginning of the 20th century. Good government, getting rid of corruption, promoting civic virtues, and that was really, I think, the goal that Pi Kappa Delta and these founders were trying to create at that time. If it was important in 1913, it is super important in 2013, or coming up on 2013. We live in a persuasion-driven society. We're bombarded by advertisements. We're engaged in political affairs. Should we adopt reformed health care in America, which is a part of a persuasive process. So persuasion is all around us. And I think kind of the virtue of the art of persuasion, beautiful and just, would put persuasion in a context of good ethics and good government. And so the kind of the drives that the founders of the organization had, I think, are still highly relevant, because we all know of the numerous instances of unethical persuasion that we're faced with, and the fact that so much of what Sheldon Hackney, who was the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts years ago, said that political discourse in the late 20th century was what he called drive-by debating, which was something that that I think most people should be rightfully offended by, the idea that our political discourse, our society doesn't really pay attention, to this idea of beautiful and just as being the lens through which persuasion should take place. And so, in a sense, maybe it's a losing cause. I mean, I don't know that you unring the bell or shut the barn door, but it's still something that I think is something that we ought to, as a society, strive for, particularly in education, to try to teach more generations of students about that it doesn't have to be drive-by debating, that our political discourse can be at least respectful of other people, and based and grounded in good reasons and evidence and sound reasoning, rather than misleading reasoning and overgeneralization and all of the fallacies and flaws that are so evident in today's discourse. The Pi Kappa Delta is one of the few voices still in academic debate for students that is, espousing, these same virtues. We use, there's initiation ceremonies and traditions that date back to the founding of the organization. So in many ways, they would say, yeah, this is pretty consistent with what we were thinking when we founded the organization. On the other hand, of course, the whole activities changed. Their, academic or competitive speech and debate is so much different than it was in 1913, that they, might be surprised at, how big and different it is. But I think a person that watched a debate, let's say in the mid-1920s, when the tournament format really got going, if they watched a debate in 2009, they would see a lot of similarities to what was taking place. And so I think that they would probably be pretty comfortable with where the activity is 100 years later. Other than it's a lot bigger than they were thinking about. Well, the National Forensics League actually is an offshoot of Pi Kappa Delta.
Yeah.
It was founded in Ripon, Wisconsin, and so basically the National Forensic League borrowed a lot of their processes from Pi Kappa Delta, and even today in 2009 we're kind of establishing a relationship with the NFL. Now, how debate is different. Again, it kind of takes a story. When debate began, competitive debate began, it was more analogous to a football game, where a group of students would ride the train and go to another school and have a debate. And it would be a big public activity. In fact, some of the early records, debate particularly before the turn of the 20th century, was more popular than football. It would get a lot bigger crowds. And so one school they would negotiate through the mail about a topic to debate. They would determine on which sides each team would be. They would get some local dignitaries in to be the judges, and you'd have a single debate. Okay, and that's the model that was present until Pi Kappa Delta invented a new model, and that is in the 1920s when the highway system was being built, and the Model T made transportation a lot easier. The Pi Kappa Delta school said, well, it's pretty expensive to take 2 or 3 students, put them in a car and go to another school for just a single debate. Why don't we meet in a central location and invite a lot of schools to come? And so they called the tournament model. That was invented in 1924 at Southwestern College in Winfield, Kansas. And so this model really exploded and really popularized debate because it made it a lot more cost effective for students to participate, where a school could go for a weekend and students could have multiple debates with different schools. And so that's, I think, the single largest innovation that took place in the 20th century was an invention of the tournament model. Well, this tournament model, in the beginning of the 21st century, has exploded internationally. And so particularly with the decline of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe was the first place to say, hey, we've got to do some citizenship training. We've got to teach our citizens, how to participate. And so they discovered this great model. We could have them debate important issues of the day and debate both sides of a particular resolution. And that's one of the ways that they built up citizenship training. And so today, debate in one form or another is done around the world. And that would be, of course, very surprising, I think, to some of these early founders. It's not that international debate is new, because colleges like Bates College in Maine have been doing international debates for over a century, where they would send students even early in the 1900s. They'd go over to England primarily and engage in one-on-one debates, just similar to the old American model. Today there are international tournaments. Universities send students to the World Debate Championships, and so it's grown much larger in that direction. You had Delta Sigma Rho, you had Phi Beta Kappa. That was just a tradition. And so, like, even these social fraternities, use the Greek lettering system. And so, to be honest, I have no earthly clue why Phi Beta Kappa. That was the original fraternity in the United States, and that dates back to Harvard in the 18th century. Not Harvard. College of William and Mary was the one who started Phi Beta Kappa, which today is still, that's the most prestigious honorary society in the United States. And why they use the Greek letters is it's probably somebody knows, but it isn't me. Today, I think there's probably more or less about 150 active chapters, and that number, fluctuates over time. There are lots of, one of the things that's different, I think, about speech and debate from other kinds of activities is that you wouldn't just unilaterally get rid of the football team, but oftentimes universities have phased out or eliminated their debate team. and so it's different in that regard. It's never had quite the cachet or the structure that sports have had in that regard. Even though obviously universities get rid of minor sports, all the time, and so basically the membership. There are some universities that have been members from since the very beginning. Ottawa is still an active chapter. Puget Sound across town here in Tacoma was one of the early chapters, and so there are some of the chapters that have been members for 100 years. Others more recently. That distinction really broke down, I think, particularly after World War II, when the fraternities, the honorary societies, were really the ones who kind of organized and ran forensics. It was not an equivalent of the NCAA for competitive debate. Particularly prior to World War II. After World War II, the organization kind of shifted. A professional organization, the American Forensics Association, was started, and so the power or the influence of the honorary societies really began to dissolve. And at that point, the distinctions between them really broke down. And so all of the organizations have large schools, small schools, and so. While it started that way, and I would say the majority of the members still of Pi Kappa Delta are smaller universities, but there are some big ones who are members.
Mm-hmm. And do you have like a ballpark figure how many members there are, maybe historically, or maybe?
Oh well, historically that's pretty easy. There have been more than we're closing in on 100,000. Okay. And right now, again, students join and they're members for life. And so it isn't like, there's a real tight figure that says at this moment there are X numbers, because I still, as a historian, I occasionally get emails and the like from old members that say, gee, I was a member when I was an undergraduate student. Could you, find my membership card? And, I want to, reestablish contact. On eBay, they sell pins, and so one of the goals with the job as a historian, it's a dangerous job, but I got to surf eBay. When old these antique pins that were pretty at the time, gold was a lot less expensive than it is today, and so a lot of the pins were gold, and they would have a like a ruby or an emerald or some kind of stone in them when they come on the market. I try to buy them, to keep them from being melted down. And so in our archives, we are starting to get a nice little collection of pins of people. And so basically, it's a long answer to a short question. Basically, historically, there have been about 100,000 members, and I would think that at any given time there's still many thousands of people who were inducted and are members for life.
So you're also kind of almost like Indiana Jones, like trying to find the pins and everything.
Yeah,
it's like a big deal.
Well, again, part of it is not really relevant to this conversation, but for many, for most of the United States history, the price of gold was pretty tightly regulated. And so suddenly now, and you see on TV all the time, these people bring in your old gold jewelry and the like. And so it's like, it's suddenly, to me, it's like, well, wait a minute, there's, we've got these 100,000, people who've been members, many of whom bought a pin. And so, gee, when they come up, we at least ought to make an effort to try to recover them. But sometimes you get outbid on eBay too. I mean, you don't get all the ones that you want. On the other hand, I have a colleague at Central Missouri State University who, over the weekend, found a pin that included the name of H.B. Summers, who was one of the most prominent founders of broadcast education in the country. So part of what I did over the weekend is try to track down. Wasn't written on the pin no evidence of where he went to school. So in discovering this, I learned a lot about H.B. Summers, things that I didn't know. I knew the name. If you teach communication, you probably know the name of H.B. Summers, but figured out that he was a student at the University, Fairmount College, that became Wichita State University. And he also then taught for a while at Kansas State University. And while he was teaching broadcast or radio in the 1920s and 30s, he was also the debate coach. And so, he went on. He was one of the very important people in broadcast education. He worked for the NBC and, the founders of television, and then concluded his career teaching broadcast education at Ohio State. And so you come across things like that all the time of like, wow, I didn't know that person, was a member of this organization. So it's kind of fun to, it adds significance. So if Summers' pin had been sold to a gold dealer and melted down, we would, lose that precious historical memory.
Yeah, and going off of how, there's a lot of people...
What we invented 4 years ago was what was called the order of attainment. I mean, the Masonic, you have orders and degrees, and so you have orders of debate and degrees of proficiency. So we needed one for alumni, and so we created the order of attainment. And the order of attainment is designed to recognize prominent and not so prominent alumni who've made a difference on the basis of their membership in Pi Kappa Delta and their participation in academic debate. And so basically every 2 years we initiate 5 new members into the order of attainment. And so our original class 4 years ago was, I won't remember them all right off the top of my head, but it's Spencer Tracy, who was a debater at Ripon College. We had Ann Richards, who was governor of Texas, William Reiki, who was president of Pacific Lutheran University. And so we try to identify each time, 5, a maximum of 5, prominent individuals who in one way or another became prominent, whether nationally, international, or even their local community, because our goal ultimately is to induct people into the order of attainment who maybe didn't change the world like Edward R. Murrow or Spencer Tracy, but made a difference in their community. And what it demonstrates is that one of the things that we know is that students, particularly long after they're out of debate and speech, think back and say, wow, that was one of the most important and meaningful experiences of my life. And particularly when we live in higher education, when we're very concerned with accountability and being able to demonstrate that education makes a difference, there are so many pieces of evidence that show that participation in speech and debate is one of those factors that students point to after the fact and say, wow, that was a real meaningful part of my education. And so our goal in Pi Kappa Delta is to find those people and to recognize them. So I already have another nominee for the class of 2011, H.B. Summers, who I didn't personally know was a member of the organization. And so when you have 100,000 people or more who've been members over the years, obviously 95% of them never did anything in a sense that was, world famous, but a good number of them made a big difference in ways big and small in their communities. And that's important to recognize. Well, debate was started in part to help people engage, do civic engagement. So if a student, maybe they participate in debate for a semester and are able to stand up and give a speech, a coherent argument at the school board that affects a decision, that's the ripple that changes the world. And that's, of course, part of the the uniqueness of the American experience. Students in other universities, particularly like in England, they engaged in Oxford debates probably for centuries, but it never made as big a difference as the academic debate movement in the 20th century made in this country. It's one of the, I think, really defining characteristics. forensics. They did a survey some years ago, and I've kind of forgotten the date. They surveyed members of Congress, and a huge number of members of Congress at that time, this would be in the 1950s and 1960s, had participated in debate as part of their training, and they talked about that as as part of what made a difference for them, and so again, that you don't have to have made a difference in the world stage, but simply even at the local level, to validate the significance of debate training and the art of persuasion, beautiful and just, as part of what is a difference maker. Well, I was initiated into Pi Kappa Delta as a college freshman at Western Washington University in 1971, and then after my undergraduate, as an undergraduate in 1973, I won a gold medal, which is the highest award at the Pi Kappa Delta National Tournament in Omaha, Nebraska. Went off to graduate school, then came back to PLU in 1979 as the debate coach and an instructor in communication. Pi Kappa Delta had a long history at PLU. It fallen a little bit on hard times because they had not had a tenure-track director of forensics for a few years. And so we revived the chapter, made connections with Theodore Carl, who was the founder of the speech department, theater department, KPLU, and forensics at PLU. And he was the secretary of treasurer of Pi Kappa Delta at that time. And so we reinvigorated our chapter, and so in 1980 I was elected a province governor, which basically is kind of a regional officer, and I've been an officer for 30 years. I'll conclude my service as historian in the spring of 2010. 30 years is long enough to be an officer in any organization, and so it won't change my relationship with Pi Kappa Delta, but it's time to find what else is going on for me. So I've served in a significant number of positions on the National Council. Was the editor of the Journal. I've been the National Tournament Director several times, chair of the Constitutional Revision Committee, and then I'm concluding my service as the historian. But I'll probably remain the archivist even after I finish being the historian.
Wow, that's a really long time. And it kept you busy, I hope?
It's kept me busy, but you don't stick with something for 30 years just because you need to do it. It's because it's I believe pretty fundamentally in the values of debate training, especially, and its importance, and the idea that we need to take a longer view. If you think of debate training in the same way, if you think of football as just, well, the game's over, nothing more to be learned, then you're missing the vital life lesson. And so debate training and the value of promoting an ethical kind of an ethical view of debate is as important and vital to me as it was 30 years ago when I became an officer, and 40 years ago when I became a member. One of the initiatives we're working with the National Forensics League to get old high school alumni not into competitive college debate, but to find ways for them to give back to forensics. And so we're just going to roll that out in the spring of 2011, creating a new structure in Pi Cap for NFL alumni, that we're going to work with the National Forensics League and allow them to become Pi Kappa Delta members in a new way, because Pi Kappa Delta's members are primarily up to this point been people who have been in competitive speech. Well, there are a lot of NFL people, alumni, who say, hey, I really valued from that. Either my college doesn't have a competitive debate program, or my life has moved on, and I want to do something different, but still give them an outlet for that. So I think it's really exciting, and I think it will really grow Pi Kappa Delta. I think it will benefit the National Forensics League, and I think really strengthen high school debate, because high school debate is under siege also, in the sense that as high schools are, when you have No Child Left Behind, and when you have all these other initiatives that are based on standardized tests, where do the arts fit into this? And so high schools across the country are under pressure to, well, gee, we don't need an orchestra, we don't need a theater program, we don't need a debate program, because they don't help students pass the standardized tests. And so, again, part of the mission, if you're going to promote forensics at the college level, is, we need to, to grow it from the ground up. And so finding ways to strengthen high school forensics, I think, is as vital a mission as strengthening college forensics or international forensics. And so it's exciting times. It's like anything else. I mean, if you wait to learn to play the violin when you're in college, you might not be, maybe you're a prodigy, of course, but, it's more difficult. And so that's the same way. Now, the difference in college forensics is college forensics has, over particularly the past 30, 40 years, been much more interested in finding opportunities for students who had never participated at all. So while there are, of course, it's a lot of students who were very successful in high school come and keep doing it in college. A lot of students just take it up in college, and that's their first experience. And so there are a lot of competitive opportunities for those students as well. And I think that's one of the important virtues of college forensics, that you didn't need to be a high school superstar in order to be very successful. And particularly at this university, over the years, we've had a lot of highly successful national championship quality students who didn't participate in forensics in high school. The convention, the first convention was in 1916. And again, this was an innovation because the other honoraries weren't doing that. Again, the idea being, well, gee, let's bring everybody together. And when it was started, every chapter was required to have a representative. And so, boy, they had to really, if you were a small school and the convention was across the country, you had to really scramble to get the money to go there. Well, they relaxed, that rule over time. But the idea of the conventions is that's the decision making for the organization. Pi Kappa Delta is unique in that students have a voice in how the organization is run. At the conventions, every chapter has one vote, but every participant in the convention can stand up and talk. And so you have, and this is historically, again, very different than, than how other organizations, or if you think about the NCAA, the idea of letting athletes have a voice in the NCAA would probably drive them nuts. But Pi Kappa Delta is unique in that every 2 years we have a national convention where the business of the organization is conducted. And so these conventions, with the exception of 1944 during World War II, they've been conducted every 2 years. And so the idea of the conventions is it has two parts. It has the convention, which is where the business of the organization is conducted, and the tournament, kind of a national tournament, to again allow students to compete against students from other parts of the country. Now, the tournament itself has become less unique because there are lots of national championship tournaments because travel's gotten a lot easier. And it's a lot cheaper, and so there are many organizations have national championships, but none of them has the historical longevity of the Pi Kappa Delta National Convention. And so last year the National Convention was in Louisiana, and in 2 years the next one will be at Mount Hood Community College in Gresham, Oregon. And it's unique. This is the first time a national championship for Pi Kappa Delta and convention's been held at a community college. Because, basically until recent times, community colleges were by rule not invited to be part of the 4-year honorary societies. There is a 2-year honorary society for Phi Rho Pi is its name, that was created in 1929 for the community colleges. But in recent years, as the restrictions against being in multiple national honoraries was relaxed, then a lot of community colleges have joined Pi Kappa Delta. And so we're really excited about that convention because we'll be on the campus of a community college for the first time. And again, that's part of our outreach effort to kind of say, hey, if you share our philosophy, even if you're a 2-year college, we hope you'll come and join us. So that'll be in 2011. Then in 2013, which is the Centennial Convention, that'll be in St. Louis, Missouri. Pi Kappa Delta is still the biggest number of members are kind of in the Midwest. and down the the Mississippi River, and so that's a good central location for our Centennial Convention. So the planning for the Centennial is already underway to kind of make that a very special, unique convention. And so the conventions take 3 days. Some of the day they're in regular debate tournaments, and then in the late afternoon and evening is when the business sessions take place, and constitutional amendments are discussed. Leaders are elected. Again, we're unique in that we elect the leaders of the organization at the convention itself, including student National Council members. Again, another unique part of Pi Kappa Delta is there. Of the National Council, 2 students are always members of the National Council, and they at the meetings of the National Council, their voice and their vote is as important as the faculty and alumni who make up the rest of the council. We meet every summer. Well, the organization meets twice a year. Once in the summer, and so it varies from summer to summer. Every other summer we meet in Ripon, Wisconsin, because we share our national headquarters with the National Forensics League. And then the alternate summer we meet at the location of the upcoming national convention. So in the summer of 2010, the National Council will meet in Portland because the tournament's at Gresham and Mount Hood. And then the other time the National Council meets is at the National Communication Association Convention. And that is in different cities each year. This year in 2009, it was in Chicago, and I'm not sure where it is in 2010. But you have to be elected or appointed. Okay, and so half of there are 3 National Council members at large, a president-elect and a president. Okay, all of those are the elected offices. Basically, they had to run for office and be elected at the National Convention. There are other officers, the historian, the editor of the journal, and the secretary and treasurer are appointed offices that are confirmed by the National Convention. So the National Council, for example, for the historian's position, takes applications, and then they appoint the historian and the secretary treasurer, and that's ratified by the National Council. The 2 student members, I forgot to mention, they're also elected members, and so they're elected by the National Convention. The 2 student members, one of whom is an at-large member, meaning that student could be from anywhere. So the current at-large member is a college student from Minnesota, College of Minnesota, and the second student member is always from the college that's hosting the next national convention. So the second member is a student who was at Mount Hood, is now at Boise State University. Since you're elected for 2 years, if you're holding a tournament at a community college, you can't expect a student to stick around past when they get their AA degree. So that's a little bit different than our usual practice. One of the things that's difficult to know is that there are challenges afoot. One of which is climate change. And I think that's one of the factors that we're only beginning to understand how that affects an activity that is travel intensive, like competitive speech and debate. I mean, the model for the last 80 years has been you put 4 or 6 students in a van and you drive somewhere to go compete. Well, that model is not sustainable. And so part of the challenge is thinking about, well, gee, what's the new model going to be? We're experimenting. We're going to have an experimental speaking event in 2011 that's based on students submitting submissions on YouTube and then judging them, because we're trying to figure out, is there a way that you can have the essence of the values of competitive speech and debate without racking up the climate change points. And so I think that's a real challenge that we're really going to have to think about. And it's certainly not unique. I think the football team has to wrestle with the same challenges, because that too is a travel intensive activity. So I think that's the first change. Second change, of course, is thinking about our students. To what extent are students changing? because the demographics are changing. One of the things that when Pi Kappa Delta was started, the idea of a returning student or a non-traditional student, that wasn't in our nomenclature. Nobody thought about, well, gee, I'm going back to college after having a career. And so, as that number of students or that type of student grows, then we have to think about how does the model going to change. But having said that, when you have a good, solid bedrock foundation, such as the art of persuasion, beautiful and just, I think we're in a position to be able to make those changes and adaptations. And so, as I say, we're taking steps already. I think competition will be probably less important as time goes by, but the idea of civic engagement, public service, will become more important as we're able to grow internationally and find ways of international competition as an appropriate outlet. I think that's a very good way to go. The fact that if we're able to really forge a closer relationship with the National Forensics League, then we can do more civic engagement kinds of projects that will also strengthen the organization. So I'm basically optimistic. I think if they resurrect me from the grave for the 200-year anniversary, I'm not sure I will recognize what the organization's like. But I do have great confidence there will be an organization.